All right, good morning, everyone. We are going to go ahead and get started. Welcome to the webinar, Curating Your Unusual Collections, Lending Non-Traditional Items at the Library. My name is Courtney Brown, and I'm the Southeast Regional Coordinator from the Indiana State Library's Professional Development Office. I'll be your host and question moderator today. Our presenter this morning is Corinne Coveney, Library Technician at Cary Memorial Library in Lexington, Massachusetts. I'd like to start off the webinar with a few announcements. To register for other webinars or other trainings available from the Professional Development Office, please see the Indiana State Library's events calendar, which can be found on our website at www.in.gov/library. For a full list of our current in-person training menu, please see the Continuing Education website. The Indiana State Library has many ways we try to stay connected to library staff across the state. For weekly updates on upcoming trainings and to learn more about what's happening in libraries across the state, please subscribe to our weekly e-newsletter, The Wednesday Word. We also offer a blog which provides information about the Indiana State Collection, interview spotlights on library staff from across the state, and information about upcoming events at the Indiana State Library. If you have a question, just type it in the chat box on the upper left side of the screen. I'll be watching and I'll get your question to Corinne as soon as there's a good opportunity, and there should also be some time near the end for questions. The session is about an hour, so you'll get one LEU for today. After the presentation is ended, please stay logged in to receive your LEU. I'll also be posting a link to the survey about the presentation, so please fill out that survey and let us know how we're doing. So again, please stay logged in at the end of the presentation for access to your LEU and the survey link. If at any point during the webinar you experience any sound issues, please see the sound issues box just below the chat box on the left side of the screen. If there's a global sound issue, we will announce it in the chat box. If you're unable to resolve the sound issues you're experiencing, we are recording this meeting and you can watch it online after the meeting has ended. So again, if there is a global sound issue, we'll make an announcement in the chat box. So without further ado, I will now turn the presentation over to Corinne.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to this webinar. Thank you for the introduction. I am going to welcome you all again, and I just want to explain a little bit more about what I do and what my library is doing. So again, my name is Corinne Coveney. I'm a library technician at Cary Memorial Library in Lexington, Massachusetts. I've been fortunate to be involved with Cary Library's Library of Things since it was just getting off the ground back in 2016. Primarily as part of the team, I process new things that we're adding, I help with creating display materials, and I help train staff on new additions to our collection. In addition, I'm currently a student in an online MLIS program through San Jose State University. Cary Library itself is a mid-sized library in Lexington, Massachusetts. We are actually the 6th busiest library in Massachusetts, which I really love that we're so busy all of the time. We debuted our Library of Things in March of 2017. And for the most part, our Library of Things collection is generously funded through the Cary Memorial Library Foundation. We've also received some physical donations from patrons of staff of items that we've added, such as puzzles, a ukulele, and board games. While our collection has about 60 items and counting, we continue to add new things all the time. Most recently, we added an infrared camera so people can see where they might be, missing insulation in their walls. They can kind of see what's going on there, which we thought was really cool. So we're about a year after starting our Library of Things, and we're really grateful for how our collection has flourished over the year. We continue to work out a few kinks along the way, and I'm going to talk about that later on. So what is this webinar about? Kind of in general, we're talking about libraries of things. So those are physical, non-traditional items that you may want to add to your collection and circulate to your patrons. For the big picture, we're talking about how libraries can meet the needs of their communities by expanding their resources and programs beyond the traditional. So this is responding to your community's demands and adapting to emerging trends to expand your resources. I'm also going to focus on some of the details of how to choose your things, how to get them ready for circulation, how to create procedures, how to get your staff ready, and then evaluating it and maintaining it along the way. So who is this webinar for? You would know better than me since you're here, but I kind of targeted this at library staff who are curious in general about libraries of things, whether or not they already offer one. They're trying to figure out if things are right for their library, or they want to get started, but they're not sure how to start or how to keep their collection going. So more specifically, what are libraries of things? Libraries have always circulated more than books. They've provided access to periodicals, to artworks and printings, to board games, to repair tools, to vinyl records. And today, libraries continue to provide access to new materials in the form of ebooks and audiobooks and other digital content. So there's also a movement within libraries to circulate collections of three-dimensional objects that can work to facilitate education and engagement. So that's an opportunity for providing things like board games and equipment, crafting tools and supplies, coding toys, cameras and electronics, outdoors equipment, and household objects. Most importantly, a library of things collection has to be tailored to the interests and needs of their community. So each collection is going to look different. So why do this? Why lend non-traditional items? It's really important for libraries to provide opportunities for experiential hands-on learning where both staff and patrons can learn how to do things and not just learn about things. And so I think that providing three-dimensional objects can facilitate that really, really well because you get the experience alongside just reading or hearing about something. You can kind of have that experiential learning. Non-traditional items will encourage patrons to engage with their environment. For example, we offer a birding kit, which includes both books about local birds in the area, as well as a backpack and binoculars so that you can go out in your environment and see these things in action. There are libraries that have metal detectors and other things like that. We also encourage learning about science and technology. So our library offers a couple of telescopes. We also have a microscope. There are libraries that have science and technology and engineering kits. And in addition, things allow people to explore new hobbies by providing access to musical instruments or craft supplies and sewing machines. And there's a lot more that goes on than there too. These collections, in addition, they can provide access to equipment, tools, and new technologies. They facilitate a sharing economy that overall reduces waste and excess consumerism. So often patrons may be curious about something, but they're hesitant to buy it if they're only going to need it once or twice. So libraries can respond to this concern by offering these items. At the end of this webinar afterwards, I have a bunch of resource materials, including news articles and samples of library things that kind of show this in action. So before you begin, there's a lot of questions to consider about creating this sort of collection. You have to think about what sort of things do you already have? Do you already circulate things for in-library use only that you would want to explore allowing these items to circulate at home as well? What sort of things have you circulated in the past? Cary Library used to have a collection of artwork and prints that they would circulate to the community, and there are some libraries that are continuing to do that or who are bringing that back for this sort of collection. There are also libraries that, used to have vinyl records, and those are getting more popular again. And so those are coming back in the collection as well. You have to think about if you've already experienced demand from your community for non-traditional items, and how else these things would best serve your community. And the main question is considering if a library of things is right for your library. You might decide that it's not right for your library at this time, and that's totally okay. Perhaps your funding would be better served going towards other resources, or you may choose to offer a small selection of non-traditional items, but not market them as a separate and unique library of things necessarily. So answering these questions and considering all of the issues that might come up is vital in deciding when and how your library will implement a Library of Things collection. For inspiration, it's always good to look at what other libraries are doing and see if there are partnership opportunities with local organizations and community groups. Cary Library, we drew tons of inspiration, both in terms of things to purchase, as well as how to get things ready, how to market our collection, from libraries both locally and across the country who already had collections of non-traditional items. We also turned to our community for help with certain items. For example, we offer 2 telescopes for circulation, and both of them were prepared by this group called the Aldrich Astronomical Society, and they've supplied telescopes to over 80 Massachusetts libraries through their Adopt a Library Telescope program. But in turn, the Aldrich Society was inspired by the New Hampshire Astronomical Society, which has a similar and even larger program. So maybe there's a similar organization in Indiana that can kind of prepare the telescopes for you. They give it in this, giant bin with pillows and a whole in-depth manual of how to have this telescope ready, and then what patrons need to know in order to use it safely. In addition, we have an assistive listening system that was sponsored by 2 local organizations, Lexington at Home and the Lexington Council on Aging, and we were happy to provide these devices so that both the members of these organizations as well as the Lexington community at large had access to devices that assist those who are hard of hearing. So going into that more, it's really important to consider your community's needs and what that will mean for you. So how will you decide what that means? What do they want? It's a good idea to do surveys, talk to the community groups, lead focus groups both in the library and get out into the community and see what you can respond to, and invite patrons to a library forum so that you can kind of gather as many ideas as you can. And you may already realize that patrons are already telling you exactly what they want through their information, through their interactions at the information desks in the library. So once you've gathered your data, your research can reveal what gaps there are already existing that your library can fill by offering non-traditional items. For example, at Cary Memorial Library, we decided in our first round of things to offer a cassette tape to digital converter and a film slide scanner. Due to how fast technology and media have changed over the past few decades, we kind of had this hypothesis that our patrons likely had tons of old tapes and slides stashed away in closets and basements. And so we got one of each of these things. We thought they might be a little popular, and we were shocked at how much demand there was for these 2 items. And since then, we have added 3 more cassette converters and 3 slide scanners. So we have a total of 4 each. And we've also added devices that can convert VHS tapes and vinyl records, as well as an image scanner. So if you are confident that a Library of Things collection would benefit your community, you're ready to consider kind of the funding and logistics that goes into that. So there's a lot going on that you have to consider. So in terms of funding, there are a lot of sources that you can look to. You can see if you can carve out a portion of your existing materials budget. You might receive annual state funding. We receive some from Massachusetts each year, but I'm not exactly sure how each state does that. We also have a very supportive friends or foundation group, so you may be able to turn to similar organizations. And there might also be opportunities to use funding from an outside donor or partnership organizations, similar to, as I mentioned before, with the Lexington Council on Aging, helping us with our assistive listening system. The one thing that we didn't quite realize going into this is that purchasing unconventional items can take some unconventional methods. So there was some extra time and paperwork involved in buying some of our things. We had to purchase some difficult to find items on Amazon or go directly to the manufacturer. So one thing to note is we made sure to always have our tax exemption documentation on hand to provide to each of these vendors, especially because that would just help speed up the process. And I'm not sure, again, how it is in Indiana, but if there are discounts available through existing contracts, make sure, you might not know if this is the sort of thing that they're going to offer, but it's always worth checking. Here we are part of the Massachusetts Higher Education Consortium, and so they work with vendors to help libraries get reduced pricing. And so we try to purchase as much as we can through these vendors since the pricing is already discounted. We kind of estimate that for our first year, it took us about $3,000 to launch our library of things, and that was getting the things and packaging them and labeling them, and it was definitely worth the investment. So how do you choose what things you're going to offer? That means doing your research. We already mentioned before of getting input from your community and your staff. Look at how your library's demographics and environment influence what activities the library can facilitate using things. And check out what other libraries are already circulating, see if there's any, if any of your neighbors already have stuff going on, or look at what other libraries, across the country are doing. I'm going to provide some resources. We're going to look at some libraries a little bit later, and then I plan to, hopefully, I'll provide some resources after the webinar as well. So then you can start making your list. Brainstorm all of the possible things that your community and your library staff would want to see the library offer. So dream as big as you can. Make your giant list, and then the next step is narrowing it down. Create your list of first round items. At this time, you might decide if you want to group things by category or by the individual item. You might want a technology and a board games and a crafts category, or you might want separate collections for kids and adults. You might want some big equipment like, event and party equipment. You could get a cotton candy machine. You could get a popcorn machine if there's demand for it in your community for these things, and if you have the space to store them. And remember what you already have in the library. You might lend out, for example, an external CD drive to use with laptops in the library, and you might decide to get one that can circulate at home as well. Then you're going to start buying your things. Get your first round of items. You can start with as many or as few as you'd like, but I suggest having at least 20 items ready when you debut your collection. It'll make more of a splash if you have that kind of dedicated first round pool to go with. And then I can't emphasize this enough, that each collection is going to look different because it's customized to the needs of each library's community. It's impossible to set any hard and fast rules for a library of things. Here are some of the things that have been really popular at Cary Library. I've already mentioned our telescopes. We also have a sewing machine that I actually haven't seen in the library since we let it go out a year ago. I keep meaning to get my hands on it so that I can try to clean it a little bit, but it's just been constantly going out. Again, we have our cassette tape converters. We have a GoPro camera. We also have some items that are geared towards children. So we have Dash and Dot, which are two kind of coding themed robots. And then in the bottom corner, we have Cubetto as well, which is another kind of coding focused toy for even younger kids. And it is adorable. I love Cubetto. So we suggest seeking out things that encourage social interactions. They promote literacy and education. They provide access to new technologies that your patrons might not already be able to get their hands on. And they align with the library's mission. And most importantly, they facilitate fun. They keep your patrons engaged. Next on our list at Cary Library, We're going to do some children's literacy and STEAM kits, so to kind of be an all-in-one, usually with an object that will facilitate an action as well as some reading materials along with it. We're hoping to get some color blindness classes. You may have seen those videos online where someone who's colorblind puts on these glasses and they can see, you know, full colors for the first time. And we really want to be able to kind of facilitate that experience of seeing the world in a way that you've never been able to see before. And we're also probably going to do a kit that includes like a stud finder and a laser level, so that you can kind of do some basic home improvement tasks at home. So the next thing is working on cataloging everything. So some background about what we do. Cary Library is a member of the Minuteman Library Network, which is over 40 public libraries in the Metro West section outside of Boston. We use Sierra as our ILS and Encore for our catalog. And we have, for the network, for Minuteman Network, we do have some network-wide policies about non-traditional collections, but they provide a lot of flexibility, which is really nice. Each library can kind of customize it to their needs. So how you go about creating records will be determined by your ILS and the reservation software you have access to. And if you're a member of a library consortia, there may already be policies and procedures in place. So make sure you check for any existing guidelines before you begin. So one thing that we looked into was using our existing reservation software that we use for kind of event booking and museum pass reservation, to see if we could allow patrons to reserve things for specific dates. So far, we've only successfully used it for one item, which is the assistive listening system. And that's because it kind of brings up all of these new logistical challenges of remembering how long a thing goes out for, and it hasn't really paid off. And I think that's just because we haven't found the right way to do it, to get the reservation software to work. So that's something that we really hope to explore a little bit more, to see if there's a way to allow people, you know, if they want the telescope for a specific week, how can we make that work? But for the most part, doing it the way we do now through our ILS just means that people get on a waiting list just like they do when they're reserving a book from our collection. And they've been happy with just getting on the list and getting the item when it becomes available. We actually haven't had too much pushback on that. So for actually creating the records, some items, most likely the board games, will already have OCLC records, and you can choose to use those, or you can go with kind of a designated category, for example, recreation or crafts or board games, or you could kind of catalog each item by the type of item. So have all of your sewing machines on one record, and all of your telescopes, and all of your Rokus, or, you know, whatever it is, have those grouped together. As much as possible, try to use the title, volume, and description fields. Think about how patrons are going to search for it. What keywords are they going to use? And some libraries can get around the limitations of their catalog by providing most of the information on their library website. So if you do this, see if you can provide links from the records in your library catalog to the information on your website. And we'll look at some sample websites a little bit later, but for right now, you can see in this image how one of our records shows up in the catalog. So we have this category is science and technology. Each of the things listed uses the volume field to say what that item is. The more information link goes to our website, where we have more detailed descriptions of what is included in that thing and what it can do. And then at the bottom, you can see some of our circulation policies that, you know, they go out for 2 weeks. They're $1 per day overdue, that sort of thing. So next we're going to look at packaging and labeling all of the things. Things, not too surprising, they come in all shapes and sizes, so you have to have some flexibility for how you get them ready. For packaging, we use some Janway bags. We found that two companies that for boxes, the really useful boxes and Snapware boxes had a lot of variety in like the shapes that they come in, and they're really sturdy. I think I'm actually starting to prefer the Snapware boxes because they usually have a built-in handle, which is really nice. And then you can also just get some generic travel cases. If you search on Amazon for, padded travel case, there are tons of sizes. And for some of them, we just kind of did a search and saw what we could, what had the right dimensions and what provided enough padding or came with a handle or that sort of thing. And so it was all, some of it was just a little bit of guessing to see what would work. Just to go back to this for a second, we know that one of our neighbor libraries in Arlington, they circulate some larger cooking materials and stuff, and so they use these travel like drum kit packaging that they found really works for them. For labeling items, we make sure that we always have the name of the thing, any important borrowing instructions, and we'll have a breakdown of all of the replacement costs, both for individual pieces and for the total replacement cost if the entire thing goes missing. For certain items, we'll include kind of a little liability label that says that we're not responsible for any injury, loss, or damage. And that kind of is for, this is the cassette converter. And, if someone has their old cassette sitting around for a while, we don't want to be responsible for that, the tape being corrupted in some way. So we kind of just included that to make sure that it worked out for everybody. Other notes for getting things ready. We scanned copies of all of the instruction booklets and manuals as we went, but we found that for a lot of things, especially for any AV equipment and for board games, there were always manuals already available online, and we could just download those and have those as a backup. For each individual part inside of a thing, we did our best to label it with the name of the part and the barcode of the item. For example, we have a portable projector that includes like 6 different cables. And so to make it a little easier for staff, we just labeled them by number 1 through 6 so that it made it easier for them to check them in. But we also then labeled what type of cable it was so that people knew which one was the HDMI cable, if that's the one that they needed, that sort of thing. So how did we get staff ready to circulate these things? To start with, we figured out we have to discuss who on staff is going to be responsible for selecting items to add to the collection and who's going to handle training staff, who will kind of take care of the maintenance, the ongoing maintenance, and who's going to do the day-to-day circulation of things. We do ours through our main desk on the adult level, so we don't have a collection in our children's room or our teen space, so it all goes out through the main floor adult space, and it's primarily our frontline circulation staff who are handling the things. We also set up a designated team of experts who kind of know more of the details that go into the library of things. So it's not reasonable to expect every person on staff to know how everything works and how to handle every potential problem. So we wanted to give them the ability to kind of report problems to a designated group. So the library staff team will discuss suggestions and donations for the collections, do kind of on-the-spot maintenance, and answer questions that come up. And our staff, we have a whole kind of email that allows staff to report problems to us. This means that the Cary staff teams also does, we kind of keep our staff updated by sending out regular emails about what's going on and making sure that we always check in about any changes that are coming up. So But while we have this designated team, we also have to make sure that frontline staff know what's going on and they're kind of invested in it. So any time that we were working on the policies and procedures, we made sure that we checked in with the circulation staff to see if that would work for them. We asked them to give feedback on packaging and labels. We gave them the opportunity to try out things before we launched. So we did before we launched, we did a staff day, and then we encouraged staff to check out some of the things and take them home for a couple of weeks to kind of play with them before we debuted the service to the public. And then we also had a way of tracking frequently asked questions about the collection and any issues that came up in the first few weeks so that we could kind of address these as they came up. We also made sure that a member of the Library of Things team was available for the first few weeks to have staff have someone that they could grab and ask any questions, give them a little bit of comfort while learning the new process. So then, lending your things. Each library offers different possibilities for displaying, storing, and circulating the items. At Cary Library, the main floor is really busy and open, and there are no service desks that are immediately near either of our entrances. So the Library of Things collection is kept in a staff-only closet that is near the main desk, but it's not out on the floor. So one big bonus of this is that the staff don't really need to worry about keeping things presentable and organized. So on the left here, you see what our closet looks like at any given time. We have the items that are on hold on the lower levels, and then items that are available for anybody to check out are kind of on the upper shelf. And so we try to keep that organized, but all of the things are in different packages and they're all different shapes and colors. And so it has a tendency to look a little bit messy. So on the other side, we have a permanent display on the floor where we have placeholder boxes for each thing. Each box includes a picture of the thing, a brief description, and the total replacement cost. Other libraries, though, may decide that it's easier to just have all of the things out on regular shelving. This works best when it's near the circulation desk so that staff can kind of keep an eye on the shelves and be available to answer questions about the collection. You can also decide whether you want to have it be one collection in one space or if you'll circulate things from the adult, teen, and or children's spaces. So then you also have to make sure to consider what your policies are going to be. How long are they going to go out for? Are you going to restrict who can borrow them or how many things can be checked out at once? So you could decide to treat things exactly like your traditional materials that you already have with the same lending periods and late fees, or libraries may choose to offer the collection to residents only, and so on. At Cary Library, we have most of our items can go out to anybody of any age who has a valid library card. But we also have some specialty items. These are items with a replacement cost of over $200. And in order to borrow a specialty item, we ask that patrons must be 18 years or older. And each time they're checking out a specialty item, they have to sign our lending agreement at checkout. We'll look a little bit later to see what libraries do for their policies. So the procedure is going to change over time. So some of the things that we're considering is moving the check-in procedure from being on the circulation desk out in public, where usually the patron who's returning it is just kind of hanging out waiting for the thing to be checked in, which can be a little overwhelming because some of our things have a lot of parts. So we're moving that back into the circulation workroom to give staff a little bit more time to pay attention to that specific thing and work through what all of the parts are to it. We're also considering whether we'll move things from categories to more individual records. This means, so the way we do it now, when patrons place a request, the system forces them to choose the specific item they want on that record. And the more items we have on one record, the more confusing it can be. So if we put, for example, the telescopes on their own record, then patrons could just place a request for either one, and the first one that's available will go to them. So we've kind of learned that we have to tweak these things as we go. Marketing your collection, you want to make sure that you're ready to spread the word, get the word out, get people kind of hyped about this collection that you're debuting. In the library, add them to your displays, put up signs, get people in to kind of take a look at the things. But most importantly, make sure that your staff knows what you have and that they kind of are kept up to date with any changes. So for example, if a reference librarian encounters a patron who wants to learn how to weave something, it's the perfect chance for them to promote the lap loom that you have in your Library of Things collection. So finding those connections and making sure that you are showing people what you have. In the community, you can send out press releases, you can post to community mailing lists, talk to local organizations, and figure out how you want patrons to suggest new things. You could have a form on your website or a paper form in the library. It's especially ideal when you have kind of a centralized place that all suggestions go to so that they kind of don't get lost on the shuffle, and you can make sure to kind of figure out whether it's a good idea to pursue that suggestion or not. And then online, each library will need to decide how to display their library things on their website. And some libraries don't really have a presence for their library things on their website at all. But in my opinion, a well-designed Library of Things webpage can save patrons time and provide easy access to the collection. Don't necessarily rely on your catalog to convey everything about the collection. I think it's really vital to both have the catalog records and also to have the online website presence as well. You can also make sure to promote it in your social media and find ways for patrons, if they're using the thing, have them kind of tell you about it. See if you can have a hashtag for it. Have them, showing, take a video of them using a thing, or playing one of the board games or completing a puzzle. The Hillsborough Public Library, they create a whole series of YouTube videos showing them creatively using their things, and they're a ton of fun and they're super effective in showing what they have. In terms of maintaining and evaluating your collection, you want to make sure that, ideally, your borrowing and collection development policies are ready to cover any potential issues that come up. But just in case, there's always something that's going to happen. So here are some ideas. If you have people who want to donate something, you want to encourage that, these suggestions and ideas that come up. But it's best to prepare staff with the responses to questions about the collection and equip them with a collection development policy that allows staff to either accept or refuse donations. So there are some libraries that do, heavy duty equipment or food related items. Both of those are things that Cary Library has kind of shied away from due to safety concerns, but also because we have a very limited space for storing our things. But some libraries have no such restrictions. There are libraries that do offer power tools and cooking supplies without any problems, though they may be more likely to require a liability waiver or a cleaning fee. But each library, again, can just determine what's best for them and how they want to respond to donations and suggestions. And sometimes things will come back with puzzle pieces missing, or a part was damaged, or some issue came up along the way. So it's always best to have a designated spot for problem items to go. And we always tell our staff to kind of email the Library of Things team so that we know that there's something up and that we have to take a look at it. When kind of dealing with these problems items, you have to decide when and how you can purchase replacements. Sometimes that's really easy. For a board game, you can just go buy a replacement deck of cards, no problem. Or if it's not that easy, you may need to end up withdrawing that thing. We've actually had the most issues with our puzzles where pieces just go missing. But fortunately, we have a huge stash of donated puzzles and new puzzles as well. And so we can just kind of add those into the collection and get rid of the ones where pieces have gone missing. We also want to make sure that we take advantage of staff expertise that we have. We realize that we already have someone on staff who knows the musical instruments really well and kind of can restring the guitar or the ukulele. So we don't have to worry so much about keeping those maintained because we have someone on staff who kind of is already an expert in that. We have to keep in mind what we do have for the budget. So that kind of comes up with whether we're going to replace something or if we're going to withdraw it and kind of maybe go with something else instead. And keeping in mind what things are and are not popular. If something's not popular, we may decide to promote it a little bit more, kind of get a social media post about it, or see if we can incorporate it into a library event and see what we can do there. So we're just going to quickly look at some sample policies, and then we're going to look at some websites as well, and then we're nearly done. So at the Sacramento Public Library, they are one of the libraries that does have some heavy-duty tools and equipment. They have a lawnmower and a power washer. They have a laminator. They have a synthesizer keyboard. And so their guidelines are one of them. They're a little bit on the stricter side. So borrowers must be 18 years or older, and the library keeps a copy of the patron's ID along with a signed agreement. So they that's how they've determined that they're going to handle those. And then the Capital Area District Library in Michigan, they have a whole different set of items. They have lawn games, they have die cutters, and more. One of the things that I thought was interesting about their policy is that things can be returned at any branch. So they have to be returned directly to staff, but you don't necessarily have to bring it back to the branch of the library where you got the thing from, it sounds like. And then for my library, at Cary Library, I already mentioned this a little bit, that we have our specialty items, which is a relatively short list of items. I think it's about 8 or 10 things that cost over $200. That includes our telescopes, the GoPro camera, the VHS to DVD converter, and a few other things. So they can only be checked out by someone 18 years old or older, and each time a specialty item is checked out, the patron has to sign a lending agreement, just kind of explaining that they are responsible for the item while they have it checked out. One thing else with our collection is that at this time, only Lexington residents can reserve one of our things. But if a thing is available and if there are no holds on it, then anybody who is in the Minuteman Library Network with a valid card, they can come in and check out that thing. They just aren't able to reserve it in advance. And again, one of our neighbor libraries in Lexington, the Robbins Library, they have some kitchen materials. They have a dehydrator and a hand blender and a food grinder. And so they included a cleaning fee as part of their policy. But we've actually learned from them that they haven't really had any issues with this. They haven't necessarily needed to enforce this. Usually if someone comes back with a cake pan that's not quite clean, the staff will just tell the patron that they need to wash it again. And so the patron will go home, they'll give it another clean, and they'll bring it back. Staff don't actually have to enforce the cleaning fee necessarily. And then in terms of websites, so at Cary Library, we structured our website so that we have kind of these image carousels for each category of things. So we have our audiovisual, we have science and technology, and so on. And so clicking on each of those things will then give you a page like this, which has a little bit more information about the thing. It'll say whether patrons have to be 18 years or older, and it provides a link to the catalog, which is through the little request this thing link that goes directly to our catalog, so patrons can then put a hold on it. Another library in Massachusetts, in Reading, the Reading Public Library, they have separate collections for their adults and children's items. So this is what their adult page looks like, and then if you scroll down on this page, it would look like you would see their children's kits as well. But otherwise, they kind of structure it very similar to what we do in Lexington, just without the kind of types of categories. They just have each thing, and then clicking on one of those images goes to a little bit more information about what's included and some of their policies. And then Hillsborough Public Library, they have a huge collection. They have over 500 things and board games, and but they have theirs divided up by category, and then clicking on each of these images goes directly to their catalog. But it looks like the way that they have their catalog set up allows them to include a little bit more information in their catalog. So they kind of go directly to that rather than having a landing page for each individual thing. So that's kind of everything that I have there. And if anybody has any questions, I would love to hear them.
Great, thank you, Corinne. If you guys have any questions, go ahead and type them in the chat box. I have a question for you. Do patrons really utilize that suggest for purchase option? And if they do, is there anything you've had to just say no to?
One of the things that we heard very early on is when we had added the digital conversion tools, we started with the cassette converter and a slide scanner. Immediately we had people both kind of saying it in person, but they also filled out a form online saying that they wanted a VHS converter. They wanted something to do with their VHS tapes, anything that would help them kind of, digitize their home videos and that sort of thing. And so we did our best to track down. We have both a VHS to DVD converter that is an all-in-one. So if they have the VHS tape, they can put it in there. We also have a separate thing that if they already have a working VCR or a working camcorder, they could hook it up to that directly. And we've had so much demand for that we're actually looking to get another one, but they've stopped making VCRs. So we're kind of scrambling to see if we can get our hands on one. And other than that, we have had a little bit of demand for food-related items. We're still a little wary about delving into that. So for the most part, at least for now, we've been saying no to any requests for cake pans or, cooking materials.
Great. If you have any other questions, we have lots of people typing right now. I'm just kind of curious. I know the kind of the hard part is figuring out what kind of things. Is there anything that you bought that you guys thought just would be super popular and ended up not at all?
I think that I'm a fairly crafty, artistic person, and so I really wanted us to have like an extensive crafting collection, and so getting we do have a lap loom, we have a sewing machine, and we have some stencils and that sort of thing. But while they've been going out, they haven't been in high demand. And so we're considering adding more unique things to that. So there might be, knitting needles, or I think the way we would go with that would be more of a kit so that they kind of have a whole all-in-one experience. They don't have to have any existing experience using the thing. And so I guess I'd hoped that there'd be a little bit more demand for crafting stuff, and there hasn't so much been. Yeah, I hope that kind of explains that.
Sure, yeah. Great. We have Christine that says they're almost ready to launch theirs. Yeah. They have a lawyer looking at their liability forms. And then, here's a great question. Do you have a delay before new patrons, do you have a delay before new patrons to your library can check out library of things items?
Basically, it's as long as they have a current valid Minuteman Library Network card, they can check out any of the things. And we've been very fortunate. We haven't had any issues with that. We've had one item that didn't come back, which wasn't too expensive. It was an Ozobot bit, and that was, we suspect that person might have moved away. but it's really been the only thing so far that we've dealt with that. So, you know, overall, we've had a really positive experience. So we haven't had to kind of restrict it beyond that.
Great. We have a lot of people saying that the cake pans are really popular at their library, seed exchange programs, gardening tools. Let's see. You may have just answered this a little bit, but have you had issues with many things not returning, and what steps do you take when something is not returned?
So with the Ozobot, which was the kind of first thing that didn't come back, we had some demand for that already, so we were already considering getting another one. And so we actually went with kind of the newer version of, there's an Ozobot Evo, and we got 2 of those. And so for that one, it was mostly that we just kind of, you know, cut our losses on that one. I believe that we did reach out to that patron, but never heard back. And so it's still, you know, it's still on their account as a billed item. But you know, at this point, I don't think it's ever going to come back. And so we essentially just replaced it with 2 newer versions of the Ozobot. And then the only other thing that I believe is billed is one of our ukuleles. But that one, I think, again, we'll kind of just do the same thing. We're going to probably add a new one. We do have another ukulele, so that's been okay, but I think we probably are going to replace that one. And so yeah, for the most part, it's just been easier to know that it's billed on someone's account, but then, you know, add replacements for them as we can. Yeah.
Great. We have some more questions coming in, and someone did post a link to the Wikipedia page for Library of Things to check out some other libraries. We also have a library who has checks out canning equipment. That's really popular seasonally. Here's a question here. Do patrons tend to respond well to surveys, and is there a disappointment when the things they request are not purchased?
For the most part, we were asking kind of what their opinions were on it, and so we were often able to, if we weren't able to get the direct thing that they wanted, we could redirect them to see what other similar things we do have. And so for the food-related items, we actually haven't had too much pushback on that, which has been really nice. And I think that that's part of it, is that we aren't, you know, opposed to that for the future. You know, we're just not going to do that right now. And so I think that there's been, you know, there's probably been a few people. One of the biggest issues of contention has been that we don't let non-residents reserve the things. And I think part of that has just been that as things are working through the holds list, they are becoming more and more available. So people who aren't Lexington residents are able to get their hands on them. And sometimes it's also encouraging them to talk to their home libraries and see if their libraries do or are considering adding collections of their own. And so if we can't, you know, help them right now, we kind of encourage them to reach out to their libraries as well.
That's great. We did have a question asking about the ability to revisit the presentation. Yes, that all will be available. We've also recorded this session. I'll send out an email to participants. I'm going to keep going through the questions here, but I'm going to switch over here to our LEU pod. So the LEU for this webinar is there at the top, Lending Non-Traditional Items. Just go ahead and click on that. Click Download File. You should get your LEU. If you have any issues, feel free to email me. I will put my email in the chat box here in a second. There's also a link to the survey. Please fill that out. Let us know how we're doing. And then there's also some contact information for Corinne. So our next question, we have a popular board gaming program but no circulating game collection. People are concerned about keeping track of pieces. Any suggestions on how to keep track of cards or little pieces for board games?
We kind of simplified it, and so we just have each baggie of pieces. You just count the bag. We're not asking staff to count the individual pieces. And part of why we did that is that most board game companies are really good at allowing you to get replacement parts pretty easily. Or if you can't get the exact item, you could probably substitute in some other type of token. The cards might be a little bit more tricky, but again, most libraries, most board game companies will give you, I think they're willing to work with you. You can reach out to them, or they already have available in their online store where you could just kind of get a replacement deck. So in all of our games, we did kind of lay it out of, like it would be something like 2 decks of cards and 5 bags of pieces and 2 dice. And that's what we would expect to get back. That's what we would have our staff check for. And it's been great. We've had like maybe a couple of pieces go missing, but they were typically pretty easy to replace. And we figured that it wasn't really worthwhile to make staff kind of, have to hand count everything every time it comes in. So it hasn't been bad. And a couple of times when we have had a smaller piece go missing, if we catch it right away, we will reach out to the previous patron and just ask them to take a look around for it. And usually it turns up and they bring it back in.
Great. We do have, Jennifer says in the chat here that she did a webinar on specifically circulating board games that is available on the Indiana State Library's archived webinar page. The link is there in the chat box. Also, someone said, let me see if I can find it, a library I know weighs the game, and if the weight is off, they only count then. So that's very interesting. A lot of game cards you can find as downloadable or printable cards, or you can recreate them. And then someone asked, does anyone have a sewing machine they circulate, and how long is the checkout? I know, Corinne, you said 2 weeks for you guys. If anyone else in the audience circulates sewing machines, just go ahead and put that in the box. Let's see what else we have here. Oh, someone mentions if you have a 3D printer, there's a lot of pieces you can download. If you're missing a board game piece, you can download those. Great, a lot of great conversation in the chat box. If you have any questions, please feel free to type those in the chat box. I want to thank Corinne again for logging in and letting us know how they're doing things there at the Cary Memorial Library. We'll stay logged in here for a little bit if any other questions come in. Otherwise, please download your LEU and take the survey. If you have any questions about your LEU, please email me. My email address is in the chat box. And then Corinne's email information is there at the bottom if you have any questions about the library of things.